For those of you who don't know, I'm Shaw Osha. I teach visual art and coordinate this series. I have an announcement that has something to do with a theme that was present for incoming students this year, which was paying attention. That was derived from the book they were assigned, Chrtien. And so we have a couple of things to support that theme going on throughout the year. And the upcoming one is next week, next Thursday, October 30th, at 7 o'clock in the Longhouse. Mark Bittner is coming. Did any of you see The Wild Parrots of Telegraph Hill? So it's a documentary about this homeless man who befriended these parrots that had gone wild and made flocks. Anyway, he is coming here, and he's going to be giving a talk that Thursday night. Someone have a question? So participate, come see that. And that's it, and make sure you get to the gallery and support the gallery. I'm going to keep plugging for that each week that we have a lecture. Today we have Dan Attoe. He's come here. He's from the West Coast. He grew up in parts of Washington, Idaho, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. He was born in Bremerton, so he's a real Westerner. He has a BFA from the University of Wisconsin and an MFA from the University of Iowa, which I guess places you in the Midwest. He's represented by Paris projects in Berlin, Western exhibitions in Chicago, and 1430 Contemporary in Portland. Any others? That's it. That's good. It's pretty good. I'm going to read a little bit, a little excerpted work from Melissa Gronland. She titled it "Paint a Happy Tree." You know about painting? Who painted the happy trees? What's his name? Right. So she says that Dan's work is painterly landscapes that are suggestive both of the grand canvases of the Hudson River School and the amateurish paintings of the American wilderness sold at malls and by mail order. The collision of the awesome and the everyday is echoed in the subject matter of Attoe's paintings: highway strip joints set at the edge of a dark pine forest, split-level houses cowering beneath big skies, dust-covered trucks barreling through mountain ranges. In reaching after the sublime or compromised versions of it, Attoe achieves a curiously personal effect: the uneasy relation of binaries between nature and culture, the sincere and the ironic. And then I looked him up on Wikipedia, and it said that he studied psychology and that he touches on grittier parts of both rural and urban life, colored with a mystical form of existentialism. And on Zed Dublerit's collection, it says that his images are drawn on the iconography of feral America. And in theartist.org it says, minute individuals often appear lost inside gigantic rural stage sets whilst playing out recurring themes of sex, violence, death, and religion. And Paris Projects in Berlin says these figures expose distinctive character traits, whether they are embracing the elements with immediate sensitivity by shedding their clothes or protecting themselves from it with clothing and equipment. So let's welcome Dan. Thanks.
Hey guys, thank you, Shaw. Just going to give you a little introduction to me while this picture's up. I was born in Bremerton, just about an hour's drive from here. My dad was in the Navy during Vietnam, so he was stationed there. When he got out, he joined the Forest Service, and that's why I lived in rural Idaho and rural Minnesota, which was primarily where I grew up. I did live in Bremerton until I was about 3. But after that, lived in small towns and ranger stations mostly. But I was never completely happy in these small towns. Uh-oh, don't know how to scoot this. I'm pushing forward and it's not going. Somebody, Ethan? Where's my helper? Space bar. There we go. But I was always kind of a skater punk kid growing up in these rural places and never really wanted to be there while I was there. I'd read Thrasher magazine and I'd listen to the music that they told you to listen to in Thrasher magazine. And, you know, but these were in towns of like 1,000 people or ranger stations of like 50 people that might not even have sidewalks. And so my connection to culture, larger culture, was kind of strange. And I always was surrounded by these beautiful things. You know, in eastern Idaho, we lived about a half an hour from Yellowstone Park, the ranger station that we were in for 7 years. And then I lived on the north shore of Lake Superior for 5 years. That's where I graduated high school. And when I started college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I had started painting when I was like 13 or 14. And I was just, it was sort of just a habit. I painted my clothes. I had a green mohawk. I painted on skateboard ramps, on my skateboard. And when I got to college, I thought I wanted to be an architect at first. But then there was something, I think, in my family. My dad always sort of took these service jobs. He was always helping people and helping the environment. And after he left the Forest Service, he went back to school to be a technician at hospitals for respiratory ailments. And because these rural places that we lived in were so removed, they would recruit people that worked for the government to work as EMTs and firefighters, because there would be no hospitals. So my dad was always helping people. And so I think something way down in me felt like I had to go to school to do something that helped people. And I knew that I was a little screwed up, so I started majoring in psychology. And I did that for 3 years, but that whole time I just never stopped painting. I was always painting, I was always making things. I was double majoring in art and psychology, but deep down, for whatever reason, art did not seem like a viable thing to major in. But at a certain point, psychology just started to bore me. I was doing a lot of research. I was working on 2 research teams, one of my own, studying the effects of music on mood and art judgment, and then one studying depth perception in 2-dimensional space, where we'd have people use what in the mid-90s passed as virtual reality, which just looked like green squares on a computer screen, and their navigation through these green squares. We would like get the numbers from how quick they moved and stuff. And just crunching all those numbers, and you know, it was great. It felt great to feel like I was proving something, but it seemed like it took years to prove 1 or 2 small things. And so what I did, in 1997, I started making a painting a day. I quit psychology and just kind of recognized that art, in my mind, this is how I justified it at the time, was that art serves as sort of a psychological medicine for people. And so I didn't really know what I had to offer people, but I wanted to help. And so what I did is I started making a painting a day. And this kind of sums up that like 5-minute speech that I just gave you, was that my feeling that, you know, different forms of art actually serve as some kind of medicinal purpose. This is my boss. He's my primary gallery in Berlin. At this time, he was in Los Angeles. This is Javier Perez. 5 years into his owning a gallery, he was like in the top 25 of the most important people in art, which was kind of a big deal. And this was what Art Review published. And he's still, you know, I mean, being an artist and being represented by a gallery is not really like a boss-employee relationship, I should clarify. It's more like a friendship that you both agree to help each other. And he's sort of that. But this is sort of, I guess when I started doing a painting a day, I was thinking about what it was that I was helping, or what it was that I was working through for myself. And in thinking about the artwork as this way of communicating a lot of information at once. And I think that each piece of art sort of contains all of these things. Some indication, and that's kind of how I was thinking about myself as like an indicator. Like in biology, there's indicator species that tell you a little about the environment that they're in. And I think what I see myself as doing, when I see all artists as doing, is leaving something like a trail for people that tells a little about what the artist is focused on in their philosophy, and it tells a little about the psychology of that person, and it tells about, you know, the social climate of the time, and it obviously involves the history, and anthropology, being a larger word for culture, tells a little about the culture that this person is involved in. But it also, I think anthropology also means like leaving something behind for people to dig up later. So that's why I use that word instead of just culture. But also, I think all art also has sort of just an interest in how things work. And that sort of tells us something about the person and the time. And so I'm going to show you some of the early, mid to early daily paintings. That's where we'll start. I don't have the earliest ones because the earliest ones were on slides, and nobody has slide trays anymore, and I don't like juggling with them. I still have a box full of them. But I did this for 7 years, and this was probably about 2002 that I made this one. I think I had just broken up with my girlfriend, and my friend Arby and his boyfriend took me to see Lord of the Rings. And when I came back, that's what I made. This said, "This is just the beginning." I don't remember what that says, but I think it was really smart. This was really about an anxiety that I had. I dated this woman who thought it was really cool for me to wear a Speedo, and I hated it. It was like, that's the opposite of what I think is cool. And so, like, I just made this painting to work out this really awkward scenario of like me at the public pool, these poor kids with those are called fun noodles, and they're like keeping their distance from me, and I have like these like swim goggles on and my red Speedo. This is called shining for deer, which is something they do in the Midwest. They go out at night. It's illegal, but a lot of guys do it. And a lot of things that I painted at this time looked like this. Something in the foreground and something blurry in the background. Oops. There's people with weird things growing out of their heads. These are these things, this is a type of painting I did called an accretion, and these really started at the same time as the daily paintings, where I would make one image. I wasn't just happy with having something be one image sometimes. I wanted to layer other images on top. And at first it was really difficult because all the paint was really wet, so I just started making these paintings that were one large painting and let it dry and then put another single image on top of that each day for about a month. So I would do those at the same time as doing a single daily painting. This one, I actually went to the parking lot at Mount Rushmore and painted it from the parking lot for the underpainting. I had just taken a class. I never thought I'd be a landscape painter when I first started this. Like I said, you know, I was like a punk kid. And I made a wide range of paintings at first, mostly on found objects. I think when I started doing it, Jean-Michel Basquiat was just kind of come into the public consciousness, like everybody knew who he was because Julian Schnabel had just made this movie. This says everything starts as something you don't understand. And so a lot of the paintings were just like similar to Basquiat. It would be, I'd find a beer bottle, I'd gesso it, and I'd paint something on the beer bottle, or I'd find an old door, or just found objects all the time. But at some point, I was living in an apartment in Minneapolis, and it was a one-bedroom apartment. And it says it used to be easier to think. And it got hard to store these paintings that were all different sizes. And I was working at the Walker Art Center, which is a great institution in Minneapolis. And this, this is how I work. I'm on one stream, but I'm going to jump back and forth sometimes. All my paintings have little stories written on the back of them that give people keys into what's happening on the front, like a map. And so for a long time, I would display the paintings, I'd hang them, and then I'd write those things on the wall so people could get them. Or I'd draw little pictures on the wall around them so that the viewers could get them, because I know people can't see the back when the painting's on the wall. And it just gives people this more information into what's happening. It says your head looks like a melon. Anyway, so I was working at the Walker Art Center, which was a great place, and I got to work with a lot of great artists, Yoko Ono being one of them, Takashi Murakami, Franz Ackermann. But they used this stuff, this like thick fiberboard to make their podiums to put sculptures on. This girl just died. She's just realizing she just died. No one can hear your sound, and the other dove is saying, "You want a soda pop?" She, of course, oh shit, you know, as anyone would maybe say that. But so I started just like taking scraps of this fiberboard back to my apartment and cutting out like the size of a CD, like 5.5, I think 5 or 7. It started the exact size of a CD. Now they're just 5 inches by 5 or 7 inches by 7. And so they were easier to store. So most of these like are really just that big. Like this one's 5 inches by 7 inches. tiny. I was never good at sports, except skateboarding. I got okay at that. These are three self-portraits. These guys kind of mumbling in the wilderness. This is David Lee Roth. Thank you, I won't let you down, is what he's saying. His famous buttless chaps. This is Kurt Cobain. You heard of him? This back here, like a lot of the bars in Wisconsin, and I think this happens out here too. We just drove from Mount Rainier, and I think this happens out here where a bar will get a main building, and rather than like revamping when they have enough money, they just add another one on. So this is kind of what that's about. There's Hunter Thompson fishing. There's a zombie in the road here. This is kind of a wide range of images, and you know, I'll tell stories as they seem appropriate. This guy, it's just a red ghost. I think. This is about winter camping, which is a fun thing to do. Something that happened when I finally got into a city and could do all the things that I wanted to do when I was growing up, like skateboard at skate parks and go to punk rock shows and do crazy shit with a bunch of idiots. I didn't have as much interest in doing it. I clinged to too much to be able to do this. I was sort of lamenting my lack of flexibility at the skate park that day. We all have rich lives. Anyway, so something that happened, like once I got to the city, I was living on my own, was that I found myself kind of returning. This was the first daily painting I did when I moved out here. This woman sunbathing on this huge deck. It's kind of what it looks like where I live in Washougal. It's kind of what it looks like out here too, I suppose. But something that I found when I got to the city is that my identity started to become more like I was the rural guy. Like everybody knew me as the rural guy. Oh, he can't catch air because he's the rural, he didn't grow up with half pipes. And it also was like, yeah, I bet Dan knows a good place to go camping this weekend, and I usually did, we are all disabled. I think that's true, by the way. It doesn't hurt you to get your head checked now and then. She's taking her pills again. This is about this amazing thing that happens near my parents' house in Wisconsin. These guys, this river freezes over, and they call it a lake because it's dammed up, but it's frozen, and these guys drive their cars out on it, and they put nails through the tires so that they look like these giant porcupines, and then they race them on the ice. And motorcycles, too. I'm not kidding. I can hear you. Stop acting like a TV show. I think that's probably good advice for everybody. At this point, I was living with my brother, who's 3 years younger than me, and he was, for entire days, would not come out of his room. I had just gotten my gallery in LA and moved to Washington from Iowa. And I was like, come on with me, I'm gonna be living on a river, we can go fishing, we can drink beer all the time, it's gonna be great. But I would work all day and he would just kind of play Nintendo until he finally got out. But it took a while. I think that was about that frustration of him. This is like what it looks like kayaking down the river out where I live. This was the first painting I did that was not a daily painting. I did not do this in one day. It says there's going to be a stabbing. I think I was having some trouble making the shift. And part of the problem was a woman had moved in with me, and she was like, you cannot work until 2 in the morning every night, you know, like, we need to hang out too. This was when Hunter Thompson died. This is what I made that day. It says there's a chemical component to everything you think. This is like one of a million things I want to show you. I'm trying to control everything. I think that little owl knows more than we think he does. I made most of this shit up. And that was such a great saying that I used it again for a catalog years later that came out a few years ago. This one's based on my dad. Collect memories, everything lasts forever. This is based on a friend of mine who became a landscape painter, but he told me this story about how he used to think he was a ninja, and he would hide in people's yards, and he'd say he'd watched them eating supper, and they didn't know he was watching them eat, and he would have his shurikens, or whatever the fuck that is, and nunchucks at the ready. Like, that's fucking great, dude. Glad you found other things to do with yourself. This is all there is in your head. And this was sort of about my brother. When he finally got out of my cabin, he found a job working for mentally disabled adults. He was a caretaker in Vancouver. And we would go to a bar every other night, and this is sort of based on that. It just didn't seem like we were growing mentally. We were getting larger, but not up here. This is the rock group Slayer. They got stuck on the ice. Two of us. This guy, I think this guy just got like caught in one of those yard lights that comes on. He's probably in more trouble than he should be. There's no shit in my ears. My brain just wants to flit around. I made this after going on a trip to Aberdeen, so I was kind of thinking about. No offense to anybody from Aberdeen. I'm from places like that too. I wonder if this is the beginning of a world war. Something that happened, you know, to me is, I want to put my hand in your pants. This was a bar that my brother and I would go to often. Summer has slipped away. I guess, I can't remember what I was talking about. Oh, yeah. When I was in grad school, the war started, and some of my closest friends, like these insanely intelligent guys, like joined up and went. That thing is going to drip on us. Don't worry, baby, I'll tell you all of their secrets. This one, my friend Dash Snow bought this. And that's Mariah Carey hovering at their birth control pills. You are already old and made of dirt. And so this is another example of like how I might display this work. But anyway, this is kind of about that too. When this is over, we will have changed, and I'm not saying shit. It's sort of about like these guys that went off to war that, you know, I was worried about them, and it seemed wasteful, like they're, you know, but that's the way it is, you know, like you roll the dice. But what I think what kind of happened to me is that I realized, like, they're gone so that I can kind of stay here, and I should really be taking this more seriously because of that, for whatever reason. This is a show I did in Berlin a few years back, I think 2006. I used to make these tents too. They're handmade. And when I stopped doing the daily paintings, I still needed that kind of sensitivity that was like, I don't need to make the same thing every day. Like I needed to be able to jump around. And so what I started doing was making these drawings. So I do one of those every day, and usually every day. Sometimes when I get really slammed with work, I have a 4-year-old kid too. I don't have the time, but I've been doing these since I quit doing the daily paintings in 2005, I think I stopped. Yeah, 2005. So since then. But this is kind of what, like each one of these, like squares is what I'll do in a day. I think I have a close-up here. Like I'll do that, and then I'll make like a little cartoon by it, like that guy with the bronze nose. And then that's what my paintings come from now, is from those daily drawings. And this is an instance where the gallery turned a couple paintings into these light boxes. And they were for a bar, and there were some neons in there too. One of them loaded, nailed, and short on cash. That was kind of that was my situation at the time. You know, but something that happened in like doing these daily paintings, emotional problems don't mean shit. Like the main drawings, the little squares, are the things that turn into paintings sometimes. But like, I kept making these cartoons around them, and I still do that. I insist. I kind of make myself do both each day now. But I didn't have any use for the cartoon ones, and so this is what happened, is like the gallery started turning them into neons. And, you know, I mean, that's just something that you might think someday, you know. I was raised Methodist. And this is what that might look like at a show in LA. This is before the gallery moved to Berlin. They were still in Los Angeles at the time. This is sort of what the suburbs that are sort of being built around town where I live are starting to look like. Everybody in the place is fucked out of their minds. Slow down or you'll make those mistakes again. This one was in a show last year in PS1 called Expo 1. This is just to show you, like, I never thought I'd be a landscape painter. When I went to graduate school, there was this, like, die-hard classicist, like, you got to paint paintings like Rembrandt, you know, that kind of a guy. I don't know if you ever met one of those. They're kind of rare now. But, like, he would actually wear a beret to class and yell at his students, like, if you got something wrong. So I learned how to do underpaintings and kind of, so that's how that transformed. Like, this is an underpainting, and that's what it becomes. So that's how I learned, like, really building the structure of these landscapes was there from this guy. And this is, everything falls, there are rules. I don't know what those guys are doing. This was sort of about some guilt from my grandma. Like, she was still back in Wisconsin, and I had moved out here, and I would go help her cut wood every year in the fall. And of course, I couldn't do that, you know, so I think that's what this was coming out of. Somewhere in here in silver lettering, it says "Come back home," but I can't really see it in this. Up where I live, there's a really great, world-famous dirt bike track. And it's something I've always been kind of conflicted about. I do like riding motorcycles, but also growing up with a father as a forester, I'm pretty sensitive about things that use gas for, just for fun, you know. But a way to move on and a map of all your personality problems. Absolute clarity in thought and vision and videotapes of what really happened. How to feel the way you want. That's what I think we were looking for on the moon. Yeah, sometimes it's a little, sorry. This one was a really popular one. Like my gallery, when I made this one, I think it was 7 years ago, my gallery was like, we could have sold 50 of those. But I was really adamant about not making a same painting over again. Like I wanted to make each painting is completely different. You know, obviously this one's related to that one. But it was important for me to make something completely new each time. And I did it that way for about 8 or 9 years. This says there is no life on other planets. At this time, this is something that I do sometimes, is I'll pick up a new hobby and it's just like about running out of material a little bit. You know, like something that's great about this process is like, if I get stuck in a rut, I'll get bored and I need to figure something out. But at this time I had gotten a telescope. And a couple of years before that, I had gotten binoculars and was looking at birds. But at this point, I was looking up at the sky and I was reading about, you know, astronomy. And one thing that struck me, you know, is that it's the chances of there being life here was like 1 to the 10 millionth power, which if you think about it, is pretty slim. So it's just as likely that we're the only ones out here, you know. But I think we're kind of programmed to think this way, but also, you know, most scientists will tell you that there probably is life somewhere else. And so this was just kind of like accepting this realization, like, well, I think it's just as beautiful to think like there is no life on other planets, so I should have the right to think that. Just like the obvious thing of looking up there and thinking, oh yeah, there's probably aliens up there too. And some nights I need that too. Like I want both, you know, so I don't care. Like I'll let myself think either way. And I think that's kind of a great thing. Like when you have that, just let yourself do it. Like, you know, some days you don't want there to be life out there. This one's called War Party. I actually made it for a show that was at a hotel owned by like a relation of a friend of mine, and the hotel was hosting the Republican National Convention in Minneapolis. And I was really studying Western history a lot, and so like Native Americans were populating my thoughts. So much time is spent chasing ghosts around. That's true. Pack of marbs. This one's sort of about, like that guy's face is melting. can't really see it. But I think when I was a kid and we lived by Yellowstone, we would go up there sometimes. And at one point, like, my brothers and I were running on some of those boardwalks that they have by the hot pots. This is my gift to you. I'm done worrying about shit. But we were running on those boardwalks, and somebody stopped us. Everybody is out fucking around. I think when I made these paintings, I was a little resentful, like the gallery had just told me 5 months in advance, like, you have to have a whole show done in 5 months. And I was like, that's fucking nuts, because it takes me a while to paint. So I started making these sort of beautiful paintings, like, and it was during the summer, so everybody was out playing around, and I had to paint, you know. So I'm done worrying about shit. Everybody's out fucking around. And this one's called Dumb Fucks at the Beach. And I had just gotten a surfboard. I had just gotten a surfboard and sort of learned how to use it, you know. I just moved out here from the Midwest, so, you know, and here's all these dumb fucks, and they all have stupid things they're saying because they're idiots who get to go to the beach when I can't, you know. It says, someday you'll wake up and everything will be easy again. Wouldn't that be good? And this one's sort of about the trip down to LA. This is a weird one. I'm going to tell you why. I was making this painting, and I got a phone call from my gallery in LA, and they said, and I was thinking about it, because you remember the one I showed you a little while back that was 2 kids floating that my friend Dash Snow had bought. And I was thinking about that because this was the same atmosphere, and I made that person in there to have hair like Dash, and I got a call while I was making it, and he had died. So this sort of became about him. And those of you who don't know who he was a photographer, kind of popular. My gallery was the same gallery that showed him. Was kind of popular, like 5 or 6 years ago. But it says, last night, I had time to lay awake and watch the pictures in my head. And I thought about how lucky I was to have this. And so it sort of became about him, because he was a photographer who would take pictures of places he'd been and people he'd been with, and things he had done. This is about a trip to Joshua Tree Park. This place does not exist. Neither does this. Go apeshit and make everything that comes to mind for the next 5 to 20 years. Now turn around and get away from me. Everybody should have a poster of that in their studio. Keep an eye on the time here. I'm going to start picking it up a little. Yeah. Be gentle from now on. Get up, please get up. Help yourself. Welcome to Dum Dum Land. It's bullshit. This was on a cover of an album by some friends of mine called Phenomena. Just came out 2 years ago, I think. This is like an 8-foot by 8-foot painting, and it's disabled folks. And it was in a show at the place called The Hole in New York last year. And I used to work for United Cerebral Palsy, and my brother used to work for disabled adults, and it sort of occurs to me that there's not enough like represented in art, and I don't mean it in like a, you know, derogatory making fun way, but that it seems odd that there's tons of art but not very much about disabled folks. These are some newer paintings I started making, and as you can see, like I stopped doing the everything's got to be different. Like I decided to focus on some things like this sort of scary surfing guy. I actually had a dream about that guy, and he was way out at the end of that rock, and I think it was because I hadn't been surfing enough, and there was like a farting noise, and he was like propelling himself in, and the water was completely serene, and he got off his board, and he's like, "See you in August," and I was like, "Oh fuck," and I woke up. What does that mean, you know? And he has some friends. He goes surfing with ladies. It's okay. You can look at me all you want, because I'm a painting. So there they are again. Things are getting a little stormy. There are ghosts. I think there are. There's little tiny people swimming at the bottom of these falls. People swimming in those pools. And this, I'm going to run through some of those accretions. Remember the earlier painting where there's a lot of little paintings on top of a big painting? We're going to kind of whip through them because there's a lot of images here, and we don't have a whole lot of time. And I do want to kind of show you pictures from my collaborative group called Paintalica. This is the first one I did when I moved out here. I think it's number 29. It's an upside-down heavy metal band. I've known several Satanists. I knew one man who had sex with a horse. I knew 2 people who became retarded after car wrecks. We're all learning to live within bounds. You are full of magic, and I'm soft in the head. And that's what that looked like. That was my old bus stop at this ranger station in Idaho. That's what it looked like. I'm gonna get you. People whisper about you. There's my parents. That's about the size of your fingernail. There's Boob Job the owl. And there's Chris Farley. Judas Priest. There's Snoqualmie Falls. I did with Snoqualmie Falls like I did with Mount Rushmore, where I just like went up there, set up, and painted. Some of you've probably been here. This is like from the opening sequence of Twin Peaks, but this is only like an hour or 2 hours north and east of here. This is what it looked like when I did that. I don't usually do things like that. People's hands are sort of like wings. Most of this is just completely made up. I will use photographs for like references. Once I have the structure of the thing made, I'll look up, like, for example, like what's the texture of some rocks, you know. And there's the lodge from The Shining, which happens to be the lodge that's up on Mount Hood in Oregon. In the end, everybody gets it. There's old St. Helens. A bunch of shit nobody cares about. Let's go, have your bags. This has been coming for a long time. way down inside you. I wonder if you know how stupid you sound. Old people going home. The police will be here anytime. And this one was based on my mechanic's garage, because I think it would be a great place for a crime drama. That's what it looks like. There's just like all of these old cars that have been there for like 20 years. And it's surrounded by these huge trees. The universe is expanding. You don't know anything, but neither do I. Again, I think this was right about the time I got my telescope, and I was really into thinking about that stuff. And the great thing about, you know, like getting binoculars or a telescope, I think once I started looking at the sky and paying attention to it, and knowing more about it, like I'll never see it the same again. Like I've seen it one way for like 35 years or something, 32 years. There's a black hole at the center of our galaxy, cold, silent, and stupid, which is true. But you know what I'm talking about. Like you have this assumption, like you know what's up there. You don't really know what's up there, but you know what's up there. You know, like you have an idea, you have a picture of it. In order to function in the world, there are charges against you. You have to know, you have to tell yourself you know what's up there, but then once you really learn about what's up there, you never see it the same again. One physical object blocking the light of another. That's Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen, who was his girlfriend, who he killed. This is a family reunion. And this is what the larger painting looks like. But I did something similar with binoculars when I started looking at birds. It's the same thing. Like you see birds every fucking day, all the time. But once you actually start looking at them up close and kind of reading about their properties, you'll always have that, you know, and you just see them differently. Albert fucking Einstein. This is good. There is a brutality in us from not that long ago. Stop hoping that someone will make a movie of your life. You would be disappointed and no one would like it anyway. I think I was telling myself that. Marching to hell. You don't have to listen to that shit ever again. The ghosts from your past have forgotten what you did to them. A special trip. Don't give up. That's that one. This is a show at the Portland Art Museum, and this sort of give you an idea of like how some places like to show my work. They took some of those daily drawings and they made like kind of like you might find at a rest stop, like some information on one of those pedestals, and they sort of served as maps where you could go around, look at the paintings. And sometimes, this is how sometimes like the neon and the paintings hang together. Fucked in the head just like your uncle. This is at a show at a museum in Spain, where they let me paint on the walls and then hang the paintings. This is Paintalica. This is a group that I'm sort of the leader of. We get together once a year and just make stuff. Most of these guys have lots of other jobs and lives. It's men and women. It's not just guys, but the guys are usually the ones doing stupid shit. This guy was the Democratic Senator of Wisconsin's son, He's the only member to ever actually be asked not to come back. But we get together once a year for about a week and just make stuff. This was a gallery in Chicago that asked us in 2006 to just wreck the gallery. So that's what we did. They were leaving the space and they wanted to leave a message for their landlord. That guy on the left is Jeremy Tinder. He's sort of a famous cartoonist out of Chicago. That's kind of what it looks like. I love guns, and there's like, you know, some of the guys in the group are the ex-military guys, came back, and they're a little screwed up. And this is sort of where it comes from originally, is just sitting down with a group of friends and drawing stuff. The same group of people, like most of us were in grad school together, and we would just hang out and draw stuff. This is a free beer event that we did at 7 a.m. in downtown Portland. After working on this show for the Time-Based Arts Festival. But we get together once a year and just do this. We just make stuff. And at first, like this, you know, this one and the show in Chicago, we were not keeping ourselves from drinking. And stuff got messy. You know, this is my truck. I gave it to my friend who owns a sheep ranch because I couldn't sell it. But then we started doing this thing where we decided we needed to kind of get it together, you know, like our stuff was just kind of looking the same each time. And we decided not to drink as much anymore, and we decided we would carve these logs. Here we are. This is in LA at a gallery called Country Club, and that's just kind of what it looks like. It's about 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, I don't know. I have no idea where that accordion came from, or that chair. Yeah. This is kind of what that looked like. But now we've been asked to do these educational events sometimes. Like this was at a private Lutheran school where we come and like, you know, take our students and make them do what you do. And we're like, all right, yeah, we'll see what happens. And it's great. Like these kids really loved it. Like it was like all-nighters. At first we would stay up all night. The first few years when we got together, we would start at like 8 at night and we'd work until like 10 in the morning each night drinking, which is really great for your health. But just in the last few years, we've started drinking more iced tea and eating organic fruit and working during the day. And the work, it's helped the work immensely. The work looks great now. Like it looks like these are just what the students did, and these kids at the Lutheran college were ready to cut loose. They really did and said some fucked up shit, like way worse than we ever do. And like this is a show we did like 2 days later in Iowa City. In a guy's yard. That's what it looked like at the end. It was more of a party. This is a show we did in Portland. And this is a modeling gig we did for Carhartt in New York. As part of that. And this is a residency we got in Las Vegas at the Cosmopolitan Hotel, and it was great. They gave us tons of free stuff and let us stay there. I don't think anybody spent any money the whole time. We just lived off of our per diem. And this is kind of what it looks like while we're like brainstorming. And it, you know, the point of it is to kind of pick on each other. You know, like, I think everybody in the group has their own practice, like me, like, and it's most of the time, like, I'm in my studio listening to NPR and folk music and, like, painting really, really carefully, and nobody's there picking on me or yelling at me or throwing beer cans at my head. So I need that, and like, this is what happens once a year, you know. The point is to kind of bring to the table what you've learned or what you know from your own practice, and then have these other people that you trust and you care about, and they all kind of knock you around and make fun of what you're doing, or and great things happen, you know. And this is us sitting around a fire that's not lit, talking about our ideas. And this is what happens, you know, now that we're not constantly fucked up while we're working. It looks good, you know. And this last year we were invited to the Iowa State Fair just a couple months ago, August, and this is from that. This is the State Fair queens came to visit us at our thing. And I don't really have pictures of the work in here, but they should be up on our website pretty soon. So if you just look up Paintalica, you'll find the work on there. And I think that's it for me, so I guess I can ask questions. Thank you. Thanks. Any questions? You guys are awesome. This was fun. Yeah, yeah.
I'm just curious what other practices you do to cultivate your creativity. Like, do you write, or where do those narrations come from, and how do they play into the work?
Yeah, I mean, I write a little, but primarily just the daily drawings is where that comes from. Like, when I do the daily drawings, I'll write things next to them. And I think my mother was a journalist. Like, I talk a lot about my dad because we would live places because we had to be where he was working for the Forest Service. But my mother was actually a journalist, and she would get jobs at libraries, usually as a librarian. And so I think, like, writing and reading have always been really influential. But I think a big part for me of fueling the creativity is just activities, like getting out and doing things. I guess, you know, I don't know, I like to do a lot of things. I have a 3-wheel motorcycle that I work on that needs a lot of help. Yeah, it comes from all over the place. Good question. Yeah, I think there's always, like, when I was first doing the daily paintings, you just opened a can of worms, and I didn't realize it till just now. When I first started doing the daily paintings, I was reading a lot of Zen, Buddhism, and something that's sort of common practice for people training to be Zen Buddhists is that they have a secondary thing that they do. Like, the first real person to bring Zen to America wrote this book called Zen and the Art of Archery, and it was about him, like, learning archery. And then, of course, there's Zen and motorcycle maintenance, which came about, like, in the 80s or 90s or something. But there's always, like, a secondary thing. And I think that has always helped me. I always try to keep, like, some kind of activity where I don't have to think as much, which is kind of key, because I think you come to realizations when you're not trying so hard, you know. I think that's where that comes from, Zen, too.
yourself, and you say that painting for you is a form of medicine, or at least can be. And so when you exhibit your paintings in galleries or public viewing spaces, do you ever feel vulnerable?
Yeah, I mean, I think kinda, but, and I think that that's part of the project. At first, I think a lot of the work at first for me was about embarrassing myself and making myself vulnerable in the hopes that someone else would gain from that. You know, when they come upon it. But by the time the stuff gets in galleries, it's more just like I'm excited to talk about stuff and share it with people. And I think, you know, I have a brother who's an entomologist, and I used to go on bug hunting trips with him. We would go on drives around the country. And he does this thing when he finds a new bug, he like cradles, you know, and he's like, check this out, you know, this is awesome. He wants to tell you all about, you know, every little aspect of it. And I think when I'm picking the stuff to show in galleries, and when I'm picking the stuff to make paintings of, that's the kind of feeling that I want to have when I'm picking it. Is like, I want to have that, like, oh, check this out, guys. Like, this is awesome, you know. Like, I want to be excited about. So I think there is some vulnerability, and I always love to tell embarrassing stories about myself. But I don't know how much of that is in the painting anymore. I think early on in the daily project, it was definitely a part of it. But I think now, like the daily drawings, there's a lot of vulnerability. It's important for me to include it in that. Sorry, there's somebody.
How do you feel like your past in psychological scrutinizing research of others, how do you feel like that informs your painting now that they're very emotional and introspective in a similar sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm really glad I don't have to do that anymore. And I just kind of enjoy the freedom of not having to spend the time studying these other people and converting their results to numbers. But I think the reason I was doing that is because I had an interest in the human mind, and that's still part of what I do, you know. I still kind of have a fascination in how we work. And, you know, like, for example, there's this great thing that I think pertains to what we're talking about now. There's a neurologist, Daniel Levitin, has this great book called This Is Your Brain on Music, and he had worked as a producer for like AC/DC and Sting before he had went to school to become a neurologist. And so he had all these ideas about music and its effect on our neurology, mentally. And one of the things that he said he found was that people's brains, there's a pleasure center that lights up a lot more when they're listening to music that's like what their parents listened to or what they grew up listening to, but with a twist. Like when it's exactly what the person's parents are listening to, that it doesn't light up as much. Or when it's something that's too far different, it doesn't light up. But if it's like, you know, so I think that kind of relates to a lot of like when I'm talking about looking for something that I can do this with. It's like that's part of it. It's like it's sort of it comes from a language that I understand, but it also has something new in it. I don't know. I kind of went off on a tangent on you. Okay, go ahead. The guy in the blue. Sorry, I'll get you next.
Where and why did you go to grad school?
I went to grad school in Iowa City, Iowa, partially because there was a professor there who made a drawing every day. And I had been working at the Walker Art Center once I got out of undergrad. I worked at the Walker Art Center, which is a museum in Minneapolis, for 3 years. But I kept feeling like at any moment I'm gonna get it and stuff's gonna take off for me. Like I'm working with all these great artists, or you know, and it just didn't. And so I decided like I needed to go to somewhere where I could just work on my own work all the time. And grad school seemed like a way to do that. So I just went and treated it like a job. Like I would go in, paint, check, clock in and at 9 in the morning and clock out at 5 or 6, you know, whatever. Painting. But were you?
So you contextualize your stuff a lot more than most other painters do. Like explain a lot even having text like in your paintings. And a lot of other people, they just don't even bother naming things. They don't even like writing blurbs. So how do you feel like you're talking about your work? Like difference in perspective between people?
I think that other people are weird. No, I think it's a good question. And I think for me, like, the purpose of my work is to try to share as much as possible. And I think it has something to do with the vulnerability she was talking about. And to serve as a specimen, you know, like some kind of specimen for people to look at and think about. And I think other artists, maybe there's sort of this, like they're a phenomenon, you know, I think we're all phenomenons, you know, and I think there's this old modernist painter named Barnett Newman who said this great thing. He said that art theory to artists is like, what's the study of birds? Ornithology is to birds. In other words, like the birds don't give a shit how you classify them, you know. And like, so you know, maybe the artist should do the same and like just do it, you know. Whatever that spark is, however you get that spark. I think for some people, like overthinking it kills it, you know. And I totally identify with that too. For me, yeah. Is that? Yeah. Okay. Were you raising your hand? Who's your?
Yeah. So I just had a question about some of your formal decision making. Like, there's a ton of like representational, a lot of really exciting sort of representational decisions in there, and I really like sort of the Northern European quality of the tiny mark making, the figurative work. But there's also in some of those you're using. I mean, you talked about observational painting, and you also talked about invented painting. Some of those landscapes sort of mix between the two.
Yeah.
But in some of them, you're using a really specific form, visual form of depth of field that is really specifically like photographic.
Okay.
And I'm just curious about like that decision-making process when you're thinking about space and spatial relationships between objects, and how photographic imagery or observational, like an observational process versus an invented process, like where all of those decisions are sort of like teased out in your process of making a painting.
I think depth is something that I really like playing with, and it sort of falls under the like how things work category early on. Like that's something that fascinates me. Excuse me. But like all of my work, even the ones where I've gone and like painted out in the field, have come from meditation. Like I'll meditate to come up with my ideas and just like let stuff float through here. And so that's where a lot of the fictional stuff comes from. And so like when I see stuff up here, I'll pick the stuff that's most exciting to me. And sometimes it relates really directly to a painting that I've seen or a photograph that I've seen. Sometimes it relates to a rock album or a video or a movie or something. And so, you know, the depth of field and atmospheric perspective are things that are tools to create those things, and it's definitely one that I pay a lot of attention to and think about. But what grabs my attention most when I'm like floating through ideas usually has more to do with something cultural or sociological or you know, something else, and then that comes second. But sometimes it is like the primary focus. Was that answer? Yeah. Okay, cool. I'll get you next. Okay, no, you had yours up.
Many of us in here are participating in a program called Making Meaning Matter.
Okay.
And we're kind of tasked with the goal of, or we're tasked with making, kind of working with one object or creating something meaningful and kind of looking at what is meaningful to create.
Mm-hmm.
And what advice would you give some of us who may be concerned about falling short of making something that has some sort of profound impact on the world or something like this, you know?
I think don't worry about the rest of the world.
Yeah.
You know, if you're tuned in to social and cultural things, if you find what's interesting to you, it'll probably be interesting to other people. You know, it'll probably have meaning. It's just like talking. You know, I think one of my professors early on told me that if you're not making something that makes you laugh or cry, then don't do it. And I think that's always kind of been in the back of my head, you know. I think it's broader than that. I talk about my brother with his insects, you know. But I think we all know this feeling that you get when you're making something that means a lot to you. You lose track of time, you're not paying attention to the fact that you're hungry, you know, you're just like dialed in. I mean, we're all here because we have all had that feeling probably, and we're chasing it, you know. My advice to you is just like figure out how you can catch that. You know, and that's where you'll be. That spark that keeps you awake until 5 in the morning because you forgot to look at the clock, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Going into having your pieces portrayed in a gallery, how do you, or if you do, how do you want viewers to look at your pieces? Like, what sort of mindset do you wish them to be in to get the full effect of what you created?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it's kind of part of the artist's job to like grab somebody and turn them into in the direction that they want. And I think there's something about the atmosphere in my work that kind of holds my attention like a little baby, and I kind of assume that it does that for other people. And I hope that kind of atmospheric quality or something in, I mean, some people would call it beauty, will like draw people in, you know, and get them kind of in that space to like hear a story or think about something. I'll get to you. There was somebody over here who had her hand up.
If you were going to choose, what type of paint do you like to use most in your paintings? Like, what is your preferred kind of paint to use in most of your creations?
I use all oils and almost strictly Gamblin paints, just because for the money, the quality's awesome. And I like varying degrees of transparency. Like a lot of times I'll paint and then I'll wipe it away. And there'll be like a thin sheen of blue or whatever I just wiped off. So like playing with the transparency is a big part of what I do. Yeah.
I was going to mention that your textual work is very compelling, like just the text on the paintings. And I was wondering if you've ever done any strictly textual work, like poems or stories.
When I was in Iowa, Iowa City has a great writers workshop program. And in the graduate program there, you had to take you had to be in an outside field as well as your main field. And I took I did classes with the writers workshop. And I still write occasionally, but like for catalogs or for shows, like I have to do artist statements. But in some of my catalogs, I'll write short stories and stuff. But most of the writing is just on the drawings, the daily drawings. So, somebody who had a hand up. Oh, yes.
So you talked about changing how you were doing your daily drawings because even from the states, they weren't fitting into the spaces that they were. And so I wonder, what's your relationship to this archive of your work? It's kind of like a hassle and you're dragging it around just like your road and still have everything. Do you view them as part of yourself? Taking around?
Yeah, her question was about the daily drawings, and what my relationship is to them, if I still have them. They're the thing to me that's in some ways most valuable. I have no problem letting paintings leave my studio, but I've held on to almost all those drawings. I've given some to friends. Those, like what I showed up here with all the little boxes, each one of those boxes was a day, so like one of those sheets is like a month, maybe 2 months now, because they've gotten more dense. But I hang on to them, and I use them, I just have them in a flat file, and I look at them when I'm trying to come up with ideas for more paintings, and keep them sort of as my own reference. But yeah, they're just drawings, so there's like 7 years of them, and they're just like that. They're not that heavy. They don't take up a whole lot of space. So yeah, and like when I've displayed them, like at the museum where they built those pedestals for them, I don't get to keep the pedestals, so I don't have those. But, yeah. Does that answer? Okay. Yeah.
So, when someone makes figurative work, you're dealing with such literal, everything is literal, right? And so in terms of reception, what about being misunderstood? Like you're coming, it seems that you own your particular perspective, which is, I think, what people are drawn to in different parts, galleries or whatever. Like it's so specific and particular and clear in a certain way, and yet there are these other universal things that are happening. But what about being misunderstood? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, boy. I mean, everybody's going to come with their own thing. I think the thing about making representational, figurative work is that everybody knows how to read it. It's kind of like, okay, you have a landscape, you have a mountain, you have trees. Everybody kind of has seen the weather be different things, and those are all characters, and everybody knows a wide variety of people and what they can get up to. I think a lot of people, I've never been terribly misunderstood. I think it bothers me when it happens. Sometimes, like, there was this guy who really ripped apart my neon show, because I think he assumed that I was a young LA artist making fun of rural bars or something, and it wasn't the case at all, you know. For me, it was coming from a more genuine place. I understood the relationship of the neon to the neon bar signs. But I think at a certain point, you just have to let go of what you're making, and, everybody's going to have their own. I mean, there's 200 billion neurons up here, and we're all mapped differently. We're all completely, no one can know anyone else. We're, by age 2, kind of solidly mapped, and you can't control for all that. You just have to let people bring their own shit.
Right, but like in the disabled people and representing disabled people, what you're trying to do could be interpreted in its opposite, right?
Yes.
And that's what I'm more saying. Like there's things that you bring up because of racial or gender or whatever, that those can be tough. So that's more like.
Yeah, well, I mean, everything is intended as a metaphor too, and I feel like it could be interpreted as its opposite, but I feel like I was pretty gentle with the way I was representing those folks. And I guess for something like that, I kind of, I justify it as like, these are characters in my head, and I'm telling the story, and I guess if somebody has a problem with it, then it's a problem with me, and I would hope they would talk to me before jumping to conclusions. But yeah, I mean, I've made some things that I could see where they could bring up some issues. But yeah.
Thank you.
It took me a long time to paint people of other races, and when people ask me about that, I just say it's kind of like hell painting middle-aged white men, over and over. Like, there's more people in our consciousness that we pick up as we go. And I trust that my clumsy interpretation of other people, that clumsiness is part of the importance of the work. And that other people will recognize that, maybe. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you.